Once again, we welcome you to today's webinar. This is Preparing a Budget and Budget Justification for your NSF ATE Proposals. This webinar is brought to you by Mentor Connect. Our lead presenter today is Elaine Kraft. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you. I am Elaine Kraft, Principal Investigator for the Mentor Connect project. It is my pleasure to introduce you to my co-presenters for today's webinar, Ellen Haas, co-PI for the Mentor Connect project, and Charlotte Forrest, Project Manager. And I want to extend a very special welcome to our special guest, Dr. Celeste Carter, co-lead for the ATE program at the National Science Foundation, who will be on hand throughout the webinar to answer your questions. Ellen, Charlotte, and I will provide information about Mentor Connect and preparing budgets and budget justifications for NSF ATE proposals. I also want to thank our colleague, Mike Lasecki, and his capable team at Maytech Networks for facilitating this webinar. And of course, none of this would be possible without our funding source, the National Science Foundation Advanced Technological Education Program. As we provide information today, please remember that the Mentor Connect team is not speaking on behalf of the National Science Foundation. The opinions we express are our own. We will be sharing information extracted from NSF publications and from our own experience. Trust me, we've learned a lot from making many of the mistakes that we hope to help you avoid. We will begin today's webinar with an introduction to the Mentor Connect project, followed by an overview of an important activity in grant proposal development we call budgeting. Next, we will walk you through the actual NSF budget form you will be required to complete. We will cover all components of this form section by section. We will also discuss the required budget justification that must accompany the budget form. You will be given several opportunities throughout the webinar to ask questions. We will conclude by asking you to complete a very brief evaluation survey. The information you provide will help us improve our Mentor Connect technical assistance webinars and capture essential data we need for reporting to the National Science Foundation. Funding from the National Science Foundation ATE program makes the work of Mentor Connect possible. You might wonder why we're providing this type of technical assistance to potential NSF ATE grantees. The answer lies in the goals and objectives of the Mentor Connect project. The overarching goal of Mentor Connect is to broaden the impact of the NSF ATE program. One of the ways we are doing this is by engaging community colleges that have not yet benefited from NSF ATE funding. We are introducing diverse educators to NSF ATE program resources and opportunities and helping them learn how to prepare competitive proposals. Mentor Connect is using mentoring to develop new ATE grantees and leaders across the country to strengthen technician and related STEM education. What we want you to learn today is what information you should put in the various blanks on the budget form, how to prepare a budget justification, why a good budget helps make a good proposal, and how you can avoid common errors, and where you can find budgeting answers and other help along the way to becoming an ATE grantee. The budget form that I've referred to is an online form to be completed in the NSF Fastlane system. The information you enter into this form becomes part of your overall NSF grant proposal. While it is permissible to submit grant proposals using grants.gov, we strongly encourage you to use Fastlane for submitting grant proposals to the NSF. The budget section of the Fastlane proposal submission process is designed to generate year-by-year and cumulative budget requests for your proposal. As you proceed, it calculates totals for the separate budget categories and by year. Once budget forms are completed for each year of the project, the automated system generates a cumulative budget for the proposal. The budget justification, however, is not a form. You will need to develop this document from scratch to explain the amounts entered into the budget form and how they relate to your project plan. The key thing to remember is that your budget should clearly and specifically align with the scope of work of the project. There should be a very clear link between the money being requested and what you're requesting money to accomplish. Time and time again today, I will mention the codependence of different parts of your grant proposal. Correlation and consistency throughout is very important. As we get started, let's find out how much experience you have had with the NSF budgets. So if our friends at Maytech will help us with this poll.
Looks like we're getting the answers here quickly. We'll give everyone about 10 more seconds to answer this, and then I'll go ahead and publish the results.
Okay. Thanks, Roxana. It looks like we have a mix of experience in the audience today. Whether you are a budget veteran or this is all brand new to you, over the next hour we hope to increase your understanding of budget and budget justification preparation. So how do you get to this budget form in Fastlane? As you can see from this slide, it takes several keystrokes. I will walk you through this process that goes from the NSF homepage to Fastlane to proposal functions to login to proposal component forms, and finally to the budget form. It isn't necessary to write all of this down. You will have access to these slides following the webinar. The first step is the NSF homepage, found at www.nsf.gov. Look for the Fastlane button in the upper right corner. Your proposal work will be done in Fastlane. Anyone can access Fastlane, but to begin working on a proposal, you will need to be registered with Fastlane. The institution that will be the fiscal agent for the grant and certain grant personnel must be registered. The institution must be registered first, and then one or more account administrators named. Once someone at the institution has administrative rights, then it's possible to register other individuals. To be named a principal investigator, co-principal investigator, or senior personnel on a grant, a person must be registered. Even though some people never have a reason to actually work in the Fastlane proposal submission system, they still must be registered to be included in the budget in any key personnel role for the project. Typically, a sponsored research officer or grant writer for the institution will register the institution, and then this administrator will register individuals for the grant being developed. On this slide, you can see the place on the Fastlane landing page where these registration tasks can be accomplished. Again, all senior personnel must be registered. For any of you in the audience who may be working on larger ATE project or center proposals with subawards, the same thing applies for subaward budgets. The organization and personnel associated with any subaward must be registered in Fastlane. Subaward budgets must have their own budget justification and are subject to the criteria we will discuss today regarding the primary budget. Now back to the Fastlane landing page. To work on the budget or any other section of a grant proposal, look for Proposal, Awards, and Status. Then select Proposal Preparation under Proposal Functions. Next, you will need to log in. To do this, an assigned NSF ID number and password are required. The registration process generates an ID number, and the user sets a password to allow access to the system. Once you get an ID number and have set a password, don't lose either piece of information. That's very important. You will need your unique user ID and password time and again. It is a good idea to give your director of grants or someone else you trust a copy of your information. You will need to reset your password the first time you access the system and at least annually thereafter. Once you're logged in, then select Budget from the menu options. Next, you will begin by selecting funds for year 1. You will notice that this is also the screen where you will upload your budget justification. Note the arrow for that. And it's pointing to some blue type on the left. There are some options provided when working on this page that are helpful. For example, if your budget will be very similar year to year, you have the option to have the information from one year transferred to the budget for the next year. If you do this, however, be very careful to make sure that all edits that are applicable to next year's work get made, and keep things aligned with your budget justification. Realistic budgets are rarely identical year to year, but rather change as the project progresses and activities and anticipated costs change. To start your budget, you begin with personnel cost. The first information to enter about senior personnel, Section A of the budget. You don't actually enter the names on the budget form, but rather you select from a list of those who have previously been registered for your institution. You may only select individuals who have previously been registered in Fastlane. This is just one of many good reasons for not doing your budget work at the last minute. If you discover that someone you need to name in the budget isn't registered, it will take some time to get this done, and only someone with administrative rights in Fastlane can register the individual. The same is true for subawards. The subaward organization must be registered in Fastlane, and all senior personnel included in the subaward budget must be registered with that organization. These are definitely not last-minute tasks. I've faced a crisis or two over the years with this issue, and trust me, it is no fun. My advice is that you have multiple people that you could include in your budget, so register them all. When you prepare the budget, you select only the ones that you want to include. You can also deselect a name if plans change, so don't delay in registering personnel in Fastlane because you're not exactly sure who you want to include in your budget. Note the Calculate option that will appear at the end of each budget section. It is helpful to keep an eye on calculated totals as you go along. Be aware, however, that the Calculate function does not save your information should you exit the system. I will show you where you have the options to save your work. There is only one Save command key on the budget form, and it is at the very bottom of the page. After each section of information is entered, scroll to the bottom to Section L and save. If you do this, you can come back to the budget at any time, and previously entered information will be waiting for you. Forget, and you get to start all over again. So it's worth remembering to scroll to the bottom of the page and save all the time, very often. Now, I will walk you through several additional sections of this budget form. Here are just a few pointers as you go through the budget form preparation process. First, the form will be in the same format for each year. So once you've got it figured out, that's a good thing because you can do the same thing year after year. Subtotals and totals are calculated automatically provided you select Calculate, and at the end of the page, click Save. The Fastlane system will transfer totals in each category, and it prepares the cumulative budget page for you automatically. This is not something you have to do. On this slide, you can see the actual budget form. On the left, the NSF budget categories are listed. This list is important. We strongly recommend that you use these categories in the alphabetical order presented as an organizing tool for your budget justification. Both reviewers and program officers will appreciate a budget that is organized this way. A little later, I'll show you an example of how to do this. These NSF budget categories are likely to be different than the budgets you may work with at your college. It is important to understand how NSF interprets each of these categories so that you can plan and submit your budget accordingly. Once funded, you will then need to work with your business office to develop a clear crosswalk between the NSF budget categories and the budget codes that will be used by your college. Now, let's look at the budget categories. As you can see, there are two personnel sections. Section A is senior personnel and Section B, other personnel. There is a separate Section C for including fringe benefits that are associated with personnel costs at your institution. Well, who are senior personnel? The senior personnel category typically includes the principal investigator, co-principal investigator or investigators, and others in leadership and other significant roles who will receive financial support from the project. These are the key project personnel whose credentials are part of the intellectual merit of the project. In other words, reviewers will look at these individuals to determine if they appear to have the expertise and experience to accomplish the work of the project, and then they'll look at the budget to see if they've got the time to do the work of the project. So the two need to be linked. In general, those in senior personnel roles should be getting some financial support to conduct the work of the project and help ensure its success. However, if you have a person serving in a senior personnel role who will not receive money from the grant, the individual should not be included in the budget. Do not include anyone for whom the budget entry will be $0 for that person. Stated differently, every single personnel named in the budget should be associated with a dollar amount. Note, for those of you who have years of NSF grant experience, you will recognize this as a change. At one time, all senior personnel were named in the budget with a time allocation, even if there was no payment associated with that person's time on the project. This practice is no longer acceptable. It is important that the amounts you budget for an individual align with institutional salaries or pay rates for that individual. An individual may not be paid more or less than the standard or normal institutional compensation for that individual. Do not budget or plan for an individual to receive from the institution more than 100% of a full-time salary for that person. This is an important point because of a great grief among community college faculty, because it means that while working on a grant, no overload pay may be received for teaching an extra course or doing grant work during the academic year. Grant work should be contained within a normal workload. There are some very specific short-term exceptions to this NSF rule, and work can be scheduled with compensation during summer months or other times that a faculty member isn't under an academic year contract. But don't plan on being an exception to the no overload pay rule when developing your budget without talking to an NSF program officer first. I mentioned the codependence of the budget with the proposal, and senior personnel time on the project is something that shows up multiple times in the grant proposal. It is important that the information you provide be consistent with each reporting. For example, senior personnel time will appear on current and pending support forms. We had a webinar earlier this year, last month in fact, on preparing these forms. And so those of you who are with us at that time, remember we talked about the senior personnel and how you report the time they're going to have on projects on those forms. In the budget justification, and in a required list of individuals receiving compensation from the grant, these same senior personnel are going to show up in all these places. So the information needs to be consistent from place to place throughout the proposal. It's easy to get tripped up, so be careful and consistent. When you allocate funds to support personnel, you need to be reasonable and very specific, both within the proposal and in your budget justification about the work the individual will be doing for that compensation. It's not good if an individual appears to reviewers to either be overcompensated for too little work or to have too much work to do for too little compensation. Because time and compensation calculations are an area where reviewers and program officers often find errors, I want to provide a couple of very specific examples to help you do this right. In the first example, we will assume a principal investigator is a faculty member whose 9-month contract or academic year contract is $54,000. This faculty member plans to spend the equivalent of 1 day per 5-day week working on the project during fall and spring semesters. And he or she will be working full-time on the grant for an equivalent of 2 months in the summer. During the academic year, this work plan is 1/5 or 20% of the person's time. This will be release time. It could be, for example, 1 course release for a faculty member typically teaching 5 courses per semester. This is likely to differ by college. You will want to calculate the percentages and work month equivalents based on your college's faculty loading practices. Then you want to prorate the budget request accordingly. You need the person's salary per month and how many academic months equate to this amount of release time. For the summertime, you just need to know what the monthly salary rate will be that you should apply. The time calculation gives us 1.8 academic months for the faculty member's time in the fall and spring semesters. To this, you will add 2 months' salary for summer work. The total time is reported split by academic months and summer months, but the budget request will be the sum of the two. Note, you should never put a number in the calendar month box when reporting academic or summer months or vice versa. So if you look at this example I have on the screen now, you will see the little box where you're going to have, I'm going to see if I can get a little pointer going here. Sometimes I can do this and sometimes not, but we'll see. Okay. Well, I can't get it to point. Oh, there it goes. All right, so here in this little box, you see the academic month. So that's 1.8 months. That's the equivalent for this release time for the faculty member, and then the 2 summer months. And down here at the bottom shows the way that this was calculated for the 1/5 of time during the fall and the spring, and then the 2 months of summertime, and how that amount was actually calculated. Again, you will have an opportunity to access these examples in the slide set after this webinar is over. Okay, let's look at one more example. Excuse me. Here is one, the same faculty member, but this time they're only going to work 1 month in the summer. So you see that it just changes that one example there with the 1 month in the summer. You still have the 1.8 months academic. And here are the calculations for that. These are relatively simple examples. If when you're working on your budget you run across something that's a little more complex or you're not quite sure how to do it, don't hesitate to give us a call and we'll see if we can help you figure it out. Now, let's talk a little bit about this other category, which is the calendar months. So we have one more example. This time we're looking at an individual who is not a faculty member and works on a 12-month contract at the college. This person's 12-month salary is $40,000 in this example. If you do not, if you've got this, do not have a gross monthly amount available, you can take the annual salary and then divide it by 12 to get the monthly amount. The person's time commitment to the project will be 1 day per 5-day week year-round. So again, this is 20% of a person's time. So we figured out that this will be 2.4 months of time. So that's the 20% of the 12 months right there. And you put that under this calendar category here on this chart. Note that when we put a time in that calendar category, you need to leave this academic one and the summer one blank. You should never mix them. So it's either going to be calendar or it's going to be the other two or one of the other two. So you don't have to fill in all those blanks. That's where one of the biggest mistakes comes. You do one or the other but not both. So this is just a little calculation here that you've got somebody working 1 day a week or a fifth of their time. And so your annual budget request for this one will be $8,000. All right, so I'm going to turn it over now for a question. Maytech and Dr. Carter, let's see if they've been paying attention.
Hi, Elaine.
Right.
The first question that we have for you, I'm sorry, this is a polling question, correct? All right, and we have the options of A through E, and please use the polling icon at the top of your participants box to answer. We'll give everyone about 20 seconds to do so. All right, I still see a few people answering, so we'll count down before we make our results public there. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Get your answers in. There you go, Elaine.
Okay, I think at this point this is where I step in. And you can see that 36% of you said it was B, which is 1.8 academic months, and let's see, it looks like there's a lot of people that just said none, that weren't participating. All right, so this is actually very similar to the prior example. The idea here, first of all, is you're looking at a faculty member, so you would not use calendar month, right? And you certainly wouldn't use academic and calendar months because you're paying the person one way or the other, depending on who this person is. In this case, it's a faculty member. The next one would be, this is over the course of the academic year, and it's 20% of their time. So it's exactly what was actually calculated earlier. So 1.8 academic months is what you would want to fill out. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. So some of the things that people, whoops, can we back up one? Thanks. So some of the things that you can see, one of the things people will do is they'll do a percent of time instead of the actual months, using those 3 different categories incorrectly. In this case, all it was for the academic year, so there was nothing in there for summer. Some people will say, well, you know, this is a project I'm working on, so of course I'm working on it for all 12 months. And then they'll put down that they want $6,000 for 12 months of support, which looks, as you can imagine, very, very strange. This is one of the other things is, if it's a principal investigator and it's a faculty member, you're probably going to be using your academic and summer months. If you have other senior personnel, let's say that for whatever reason a dean or chairperson who's actually paid on a calendar month schedule is working with you, is providing some sort of support for you, that person should actually be listed and would be listed then using calendar months. And one of the other mistakes is if it's someone who's not at your college, you don't want them listed as senior personnel at your college. And let's see if there are any other questions that people came up with. Okay, I see one in the chat room, which is we have 10 months in our academic year. How is that calculated? I actually had the same thing. If you look at the total number of days that you're supported, at least at my old home institution, I was actually supported for 9 months, but they had the pay arranged so that I was paid for 10 months. So what you have to do is just back that out and figure out what it is and per the actual number of days you're being paid. One thing that did for me with my first ATE award was I actually got my full academic salary was taken care of. I asked for 2 months of summer support, and that worked just fine. I was really only asking for the support over the 9 academic months that was the contract number, even though I was paid over 10 months, and then the 2 summer months. One thing NSF does not allow us to do is, let's say you're paid over those 9 months, and there's 3 months where you're not doing anything. You can't ask for 3 months of summer support. NSF figures that everybody needs a vacation, so you can only request 2 months of summer support. Let's see. It is. I see another one where it says basically how many months can you request. The grant proposal guide, which is something hopefully all of you either have read or will read, it has some specific language on how much time you can request to be compensated for. And the grant proposal guide actually says that the maximum for the any National Science Foundation proposal coming in is 2 summer months of support. A solicitation, though, can trump the grant proposal guide, and the ATE solicitation does allow you to request additional time. Part of this is because it was recognized when the ATE program was first developed that the teaching load for community college faculty is much, much higher than it is for most individuals at 4-year institutions. So you do have the ability with the ATE solicitation to request release time during the academic year, and that's actually perfectly acceptable. It just has to be very, very clearly justified in the budget justification why you need that amount of time, and that it is release time. Again, as Elaine pointed out, it would be great if you could say, well, yeah, my salary, my normal salary is $6,000, but I think since I'm asking for release time or summer support, I'm going to ask for $10,000 a month. That doesn't go over very well either. You'll find that you'll have to do a revised budget if your proposal reviews well.
Thanks, Dr. Carter.
Let's see.
Thank you. We're going to actually save or hold the rest of them until we reach the question portion of the webinar. And for right now, we're going to move on to our next slide.
Okay, thank you. As you can see from this photo of the actual budget form, the Other Personnel section has several categories that are not likely to be applicable to the NSF ATE grants, such as postdoctoral scholars. You may, however, have other personnel or other professionals who will be compensated to help with your project. I've seen this category used for such jobs as a lab assistant, a webmaster, other technical support personnel, or a project coordinator. Secretarial or clerical support can be included only in very limited specific circumstances. The NSF Grant Proposal Guide, Chapter 2, Section G on Budgets and Budget Justifications provides specifics. To be eligible, the work must clearly support the work of the grant and be distinct and distinguishable from functions that are normally performed by the college. In most cases, indirect costs are designed to cover this expense. Be aware that students are typically paid hourly rates and time is capped at 20 hours a week during the academic year and 40 hours a week in the summer. The total amount to be paid based on hourly calculations in the budget justification will be inserted on this form. You will not include bios for individuals budgeted in this category. Again, consider the type of contract the person has with the college to determine the time. If the person is on a 12-month contract, use calendar months, and on a separate academic year or summer contracts, you would use those categories. Once you have entered all personnel salaries and wages, the next thing you calculate is fringe benefits, and that will be added to the amount. On this slide, you have only one number to insert for total fringe benefits on the salaries included in sections A and B. The way that you calculate fringe benefit amount should be included in your budget justification, giving your institutional's fringe benefit rate and other details that will explain how you came up with the net number. This slide points out that all personnel except graduate students should be included in your fringe benefit calculation. Now, I think we're going to have a chance for some more questions.
Yes, thank you. Again, for Dr. Carter, we've got, it says, I have been told that release time should be calculated based on the cost of the part-time faculty member who would be hired to cover the class. This would be a much lower rate. Which is accurate?
I would say that it's your release time. So in that sense, it provides additional funds for your institution in hiring someone as an adjunct to take your place in the classroom. But that might be something that's up to you. And I might defer to Elaine Kraft on this one. Elaine, have you addressed that question before?
Yes, and you can. It's been my experience that you can do it either way. If your budget is really tight, you can just budget for what the adjunct will cost you. But if you budget for what the prorated amount that your faculty that you're releasing is, sometimes it gives you a little bit more latitude to hire a little bit more lab support or something like that. It gives you just a little bit more personnel money to help get the work done.
Thank you, Elaine. Then we have, can we utilize required community service hours for faculty as release time for grant work and include in the budget?
That's one I haven't handled before. I have actually never seen anyone request that on a budget form. So I'm not actually sure how to answer that one. I do not believe you can use community service time.
I think, Dr. Carter, that this might be something that they would consider falling into that cost sharing category. So I think that probably
great. Thank you, Elaine.
Wouldn't fly.
The next question I have asks, where do you put a co-PI from another institution?
So there's a couple of places that you could do that, and I think we're going to get to that later in this webinar. There's two ways you could do it. Either a subaward could be made to the other institution with the co-PI listed on the subaward, or you could also, depending on what the co-PI wants to do, hire them, basically have them listed as a consultant. But I think we're going to do have a lot more detail on that coming
up. A couple more here. I have, how long is a one-course reduction?
That depends on the teaching load at your institution. The example that Elaine used was that you were teaching 5 courses per semester. So it's going to be different for every single institution across the United States. You need to just find out what is, well, and you probably know that. What's your full-time load? How many courses is it? And then you calculate.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr.
there.
Carter. I have, can my institution waive any of the indirect costs?
Well, I think we all wish that that could happen, and it used to be that people could actually negotiate with their own administration and say, gee, I know our indirect cost rate is 78%, but I won't be able to do my project at that, so how about if we only ask for 20%? That used to go through at the National Science Foundation, and a few years back they said that that would be considered as an in-kind match. So that's no longer required. You do have to use your fully negotiated federal indirect rate. As far as how you work with your institution as to how those indirect funds are used, that's completely up to you, but a program officer will just ask at any time that the fully negotiated rate is there on the budget
I've got 3 more that I think we'll go ahead and pose, and then we'll save any additional questions for the next Q&A session. Right now I've got, how are folks not employed by the college included?
Usually that would be in the consultant category.
And I also have, are PIs, co-PIs, required to be full-time faculty?
Not necessarily, but if you think about an important issue even as you're crafting your proposal, is what would be sustainable in the post-award time frame. So if you think about you need to use an adjunct, you're developing, let's say, a new program in wind energy, and there is no faculty a full-time faculty that has that expertise, but there is an adjunct who does, and you're going to start a new program with this adjunct faculty as the PI or one of the co-PIs. One of the things we would ask for is, would your administration write a letter that would be included in supplementary documentation that would state that if the program is successful and you get it off the ground, would you either hire that person or someone with equivalent expertise to keep
Great,
the
thank
program
you. I have one
running?
final question, and that is, how much money can I budget for equipment?
In the solicitation for the ATE program, it gives a $200,000 max, except for the case where a single piece of equipment costs that or more than that, at which point you want to contact a program officer immediately and tell them what's going on and ask that there be a waiver if you do need to ask for a very, very expensive
Thank you, Dr.
equipment.
Carter. We'll save additional questions for our next break, and we'll move forward on to our next slide.
Great, thank you. This is Ellen with the American Association of Community Colleges, and I'd like to continue talking about our budget costs. Elaine covered senior personnel, fringe benefits, and now I will be talking about equipment and some of the other categories. So if you look at this form, you'll see that equipment is where you would list single items with an acquisition cost of $5,000 or more. So what that means is, in addition to the price of the equipment, you would want to factor in the cost of any attachments or accessories needed to make the equipment usable. So if you were purchasing a piece of equipment for the grant that cost $4,000, but you also needed 2 attachments that cost $500 each to make it usable, then that would bring your total acquisition cost for this piece of equipment to $5,000, and it would be budgeted here in this category. And all equipment and instrumentation purchases must be necessary to support your grant activities, not something that's otherwise available and accessible, and acquired in accordance with your college's organizational practice. Any equipment purchased with grant funds must also have a service life of over 1 year. Do note that your college may classify equipment differently than the National Science Foundation. While your college may consider laptop computers to be equipment, you'll need to go by NSF's definition of equipment when budgeting for your grant, which is based on monetary amounts. So if you're purchasing laptop computers for use in your project, and they individually cost less than $5,000, then they would be budgeted in materials and supplies, which we'll cover shortly. So again, the equipment category is for single items with a total acquisition cost of $5,000 or greater that are necessary to meet your grant objectives. Just a quick take on what equipment is not. NSF funds cannot be used to support costs that would normally be made to you if you didn't have a grant, such as laboratory upgrades or routine teaching activities. And equipment should not include general utility items such as office equipment or office furniture. And most importantly, and you'll hear this with everything we're talking about in the budget, your equipment costs will need to be detailed in your budget justification, which includes addressing why you need this equipment and how it will be used on the grant. From equipment, I'd like to talk about travel. So this travel line is only to be used to budget for travel costs for project staff or college personnel that may not be project staff but are traveling to help accomplish your project objectives. So for example, faculty members that need to attend a professional development meeting to be able to test project-generated materials in their classes. So you would not budget for travel for, say, advisors, speakers, or consultants under this category. Only project staff and college personnel that are traveling for the project. So you may include only travel necessary to accomplish project objectives. So for example, funds could be requested for field work, attendance at meetings or conferences, or other travel associated with specific proposed work. Attendance at meetings or conferences that might be necessary to accomplish the proposal objectives or to disseminate the results of what's going on in your grant. So when budgeting, most institutions have their own guidelines on mileage and per diem, and NSF accepts these. So the budgeted travel allowance should be consistent with the policies of your organization as administrators of the grant. Do note some restrictions on travel. You must book the most economical form of travel, such as economy class airfare. And you'll want to detail your travel expenses in the budget justification and include accurate estimates. So for example, if you're budgeting to attend a conference, you'll want to include the actual hotel rates, the number of nights you need to stay. You'll need to search airfares for the time frame of traveling and include them, and be sure to budget for meals, ground transportation costs, and other incidentals. And a very important consideration is that it's unallowable to use federal funds for alcohol or for entertainment costs. So you definitely don't want to include those in your budget. And if your project objectives require foreign travel, you must travel on U.S. carriers if they're available. And for the purposes of budgeting, travel to Canada, Mexico, and Puerto Rico are considered domestic travel. And this travel line is also where you would budget as new PIs to attend the National ATE Principal Investigators Conference, which is held each October. And it's a good idea to include funds for at least 2 team members and up to 5 to attend the annual ATE PI conference. So if you're applying for an ATE grant in October 2015 and it's funded, you would be expected to attend the 2016 ATE conference. AACC actually hosts the conference and provides some assistance by covering the cost of registration and 2 nights lodging for 2 people per ATE project or center. So you'd want to consider budgeting airfare and other travel costs to and from Washington, D.C. for at least 2 of your team members to attend. And now we move into participant support. So if your college is planning to host or offer conferences, meetings, training workshops, or other short-term instructional activities as part of your grant, then the cost to support those participants or those trainees at those events would be budgeted here under participant support. So participant support costs can be used for stipends, travel, and other related costs to support attendance at workshops or conferences. And it's important to distinguish between participants and project staff. Participants are not employees. They're individuals who are recipients of service or training provided by your college's funded event or training activity. And while participants perform no direct work for the project, they're still a vital part of your grant activities, and you can certainly require them to complete training activities, complete surveys, and provide input to be eligible to receive the stipends or travel support offered by your grant. And here's the actual form you would enter participant support costs, and you can see it's broken out into 4 categories. So when budgeting, you need to consider that all participant support costs must be reasonable and limited to the days of attendance at the event, plus the actual travel time required to reach the event location. So, and again, support costs should conform with the policy of your college and your college's travel policies. You'll need to provide detailed information under these categories. So for stipends, for example, you need to provide the stipend amount that each participant would receive and what expenses you've figured into the provision of that stipend. Under travel, you need to explain the purpose of the travel and the time allotted, and again noting the difference between travel in Section E, where we're budgeting for college personnel, project personnel, versus the travel under participant support, which is for your participants or your trainees. In other subsistence, you need to provide the amount allotted for subsistence, which can be a food per diem, and again specify the period for which you're providing that assistance. You'll also need to consider that if meals or lodging are furnished without charge or at a nominal cost to the participant, such as having some of those costs included in a registration fee, then the per diem for subsistence would need to be correspondingly reduced. So as an example, if breakfast and lunch are included as part of your training activity, you can't then reimburse the participants for the cost of those meals since they're actually already covered. And as I mentioned previously, it can't be stressed enough, NSF funds can't be used for the purchase of alcohol or for entertainment. And under the category of other, you can list any other expenses associated that would be needed for participants and how it's relevant and necessary to the project, such as conference materials, flash drives, those types of things could go into other. Just a few budget considerations. You definitely want to specify the number of participants to be engaged in or served by the project. You don't want to include a large budget amount for participant support and then not estimate the number of attendees that you're actually targeting with your work. And also note that participant support works a little differently than other budget categories. Money can't be transferred out of this budget category without NSF approval. So you really need to be thoughtful about budgeting and participant support. And I'd actually like to turn it over to Celeste to give you a little bit more around participant support and some program officer tips.
Great, thank you, Ellen. So just a few tips, as you see on this helpful tips, used primarily for people not at your institution. So what's a good example? Well, maybe part of your project is that you've developed some curriculum, and it's let's go back to wind energy. You happen to know that you would like to do a summer workshop around the materials you've developed as part of your dissemination plan of telling other people and getting other faculty up to speed on using the curriculum that you've developed. So you could have a summer workshop, and that would be adding value to your project because it's part of your dissemination plan. It can include stipends depending on how you've worked things out for high school teachers and students. If this was something that was going to happen during the year, I was thinking one other thing you could put in other, potentially as a draw or to help high school teachers to be able to attend. You might be able to include and justify the fact that you would want to provide a high school teacher with an amount of money to pay for a sub so that they could actually attend. You can include stipends, but a lot of times traveling to and from is more important. Again, the food is there. Be sure you do put in that estimated number of participants because it really does look funny when you have $30,000 of participant support and you're actually supporting 0 participants. So that's definitely something to think about. Every once in a while, people will do developing a curriculum module, and one of the things they'll use is some of the materials and supplies and other so that they can send the faculty or teachers back with enough materials to at least implement what they've learned at least one time. That might be something you want to consider. This is, again, just to say that this is a category where let's say that you were going to do summer workshops and you found out that due to where you are just geographically, instead of getting 25 people per summer, you actually were only able to bring in 15. So towards the end of your award, you're actually going to have extra money in there, and well, you could do an extra summer workshop, or you could create a notification or request to your program officer, have that formally submitted via Fastlane, and the program officer would look at your justification where you said, gee, thought I could bring in this number of people, actually brought in less. Turns out something that's very important is providing more materials and supplies for a small number of faculty that want to implement this a second time and they're not quite at the point where their own institution is going to do this. We'd like to move those funds out of participant support to do something a little bit differently with them. Or we have a new consultant that's come on that's really got something value added to this project. So you put in that request, and I think as long as it's reasonable, your program officer is going to say recommend approval of this, but it is something you want to be aware of that you do need to do. Now let's say you had 25 people and you end up with 45 people each summer. No problem with you and your financial people moving funds from other lines on your budget into participant support. It's only if you want to take money out of participant support. And that really is the only line that NSF has any authority over.
Thank you, Celeste. I see that there's some great questions coming in through the chat box, and we will address them on our next question break. I'm going to quickly go through highlighting the rest of the direct costs, and then I think we'll have an opportunity to get to questions. Wanted to move to our other direct costs here, which you can see are materials and supplies, publication costs, consultant services, computer services, and subcontracts. And you need to identify and itemize all anticipated direct costs in your budget justification. Moving to materials and supplies, So these include items that are project specific and demonstrated as necessary to run the project that cost $5,000 or less. So we talked about equipment costs being those single items that are $5,000 or more. Things that are under $5,000 would be listed here in material and supplies. So for example, if you're purchasing 20 computers at $800 per computer, the $16,000 would still be listed under materials and supplies as the individual cost per unit is under $5,000. And note that NSF, again, doesn't allow for the purchase of desks or office furniture or general office supplies that are not being used exclusively for the project. Materials and supplies need to be directly tied to the project and can include items such as plasticware, chemicals, project-specific office supplies, etc. Moving on to publication, documentation, and dissemination. So funds may be requested related to documenting, preparing, publishing, and sharing findings and supporting materials coming out of your grant activities. So the following types of activities, from reports, editing, documentation, creating of web pages, production of posters. These are all things that could fall under publication and dissemination. And as another example is new ATEPIs. You'd be expected to attend and eventually participate in a showcase session at the annual ATE conference to share strategies and resources coming out of your projects. And funds in this category could be used to develop an exhibit or a poster or other materials to disseminate information on your project outcomes. Moving to consultant services. This is where you would budget for people that are working on your project but are not a part of the project staff. So those individuals that are paid a fee for service as external contractors. Note you'll need to identify and justify your need for consultants in the budget justification, as well as include anticipated cost and length of service. That gives the detail of how many hours or days the consultant will work and at what rate of pay. So Celeste mentioned this is one place where you could put in a COPI from another institution. So for example, if you have a consultant listed as $6,000 in this budget category, you'd have to define that. It might be 10 days at $500 a day plus $1,000 for travel expenses, or 60 hours at $80 per hour plus $1,200 for travel expenses. So you'd need to include this level of detail when budgeting for consultants. In addition, you can't budget to pay a consultant more than their reasonable and regular rate of pay. An external evaluator is often budgeted as a consultant to the project. You can see here some average ranges for how evaluators can be budgeted and some components to think about when budgeting for evaluation: time, travel, materials, and any institutional indirect or overhead related to that. Mentor Connect recently held a webinar focused on small grants and developing evaluations around them, so high impact, low cost evaluation for small projects. If you did not participate on that webinar, we highly recommend you view the PowerPoint and the handouts and listen to the recording. Links on where to get that information are included in follow-up from this webinar, as well as could be found on the Mentor Connect website. So that's a resource available to you as well. Computer services. So the cost of computer services may be requested only if your existing institutional policy is to bill computer services as direct costs. And justification of an established computer service rate at your institution, your organization, must be included. Computer services can include things like computer-based searches for data and other information, just to provide an example of what this category might mean. But general purposes computer equipment such as word processing should not be requested. Subawards, Celeste made a reference to subawards as another place where you could budget the participation of another organization. New grantees are not likely to have subawards, but some of you may, and certainly larger projects could include subawards. So we'll spend a minute going over this budget category. So subawards are used to fund a discrete portion of work that is carried out by another organization. And the subcontracting PI is responsible for the work proposed in the subaward. And the subawardee is responsible for management and oversight of the subaward budget. But it's the prime institution, which would be your college. You're ultimately responsible for all the project work on your grant, including your subawardees. Do note that subawards require separate budgets. So on the main budget form, you would list the total annual subaward costs, but your budget justification must include details on the subaward, including a description of the work to be performed and a clear description of the basis of selection for the subawardee. So subawardees are named on the budget, and a separate budget for each subawardee must be included. And in addition, in order to list a subawardee, that organization needs to be registered in Fastlane. So you'd want to get that completed as well. Under this category of other direct costs, any other direct costs not previously identified would be included here and detailed and itemized in the budget justification. So costs necessary to perform the project but not listed elsewhere in the budget would go here. Examples perhaps include other materials and supplies for work conducted in the office or lab, meeting costs such as conference registration fees, or travel for advisors or National Visiting Committee members as some examples. And at this point I wanted to, we'll have another poll and we'll have Celeste answer this, but I'll pose the question. So J.K. Smith at XYZ University will be your evaluator, so how should this person be compensated? So where would you essentially budget them in your grant? If you wouldn't mind using your polling buttons and answer A, B, C, D, or E, and we'll ask Maytech to run the poll and give us the results, and then we'll have Celeste chime in with the answer.
We still have answers coming in, so I'll give everyone a few more seconds, and then I'll post the results.
Okay, so a majority of you picked A, which is as a consultant. You could certainly do it that way, but notice that the question is actually telling you that this person is at a university that's going to be your evaluator. So maybe it's a teaching and learning center at a university, and this person is actually a faculty member. You could do it as a consultant. You could also do it as a subaward, and the subaward would be to XY University, with J.K. Smith being the senior personnel, and you would actually then work with that person as the evaluator for your project to determine how many, what their rate is, whether they're on an academic calendar or a 12-month calendar, and so it would actually work out either way. A, B, or C could be correct. So pretty much everybody got it.
Thank you, Celeste. And now we move to the easy form here. So this is the sample form from Fastlane that you actually don't have to do anything. If you put in all your direct costs, Fastlane will calculate your direct costs for you. So direct cost is done, but of course your budget is not yet complete because you'll need to calculate your indirect costs. So I'd like to turn it over to Elaine to cover indirect.
Okay, every institution receiving a grant award from the NSF must include indirect costs in the budget. This is money from the grant that helps support the business office and other functions of the college, and including indirect costs is mandatory. You need to determine if your institution already has a rate established. These rates change over time, so make certain that the one used in your proposal is current. During the funding process, you will be asked to provide verification of your rate. If your institution does not have a rate established, your institution will not be able to apply for one until after your grant proposal has been recommended for funding. At that time, your college will likely be referred to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to negotiate the rate. If your institution does not have an indirect cost rate established already, NSF has recently clarified that institutions should apply the NSF de minimis rate until a rate for your college can be determined. The de minimis rate, defined by NSF, is 10% of modified total direct cost. This means the amount remaining once ineligible expenses are subtracted from total direct cost for the project. For example, participant support costs and equipment costs are not eligible for indirect and must be subtracted. The subaward budget category is another for which full indirect costs are not allowed. NSF does allow the first $25,000 of a subaward to be included in indirect cost calculations. It is important to pay close attention to the impact that indirect costs have on your project budget. Indirect costs are included in the total grant amount. This amount is not in addition to the amount that you're requesting for the project. So don't get tangled up about this. Let me share just a couple of real examples. One new to ATE college thought they were submitting a small grant for institutions new to ATE last October. However, after budgeting their project for the allowable $200,000 maximum grant amount, they mistakenly added their indirect cost on top of that amount. This kicked the proposal out of the small grants category during the NSF sorting process, and it was reviewed with regular project grants where it was not competitive enough to be funded and was declined. In another situation, a community college discovered that they would be required to use their statewide community college system indirect cost rate of 54%, which had the effect of cutting the amount of grant funds available to run the project in half. This had a huge impact on their project plan, and they didn't find this out really early. So you need to figure out what your situation is as soon as you can on this, because it does make a huge difference. Reworking a budget to accommodate indirect cost is not uncommon. For determining the indirect cost amount for your project, you will need to determine something called a base amount for the indirect cost calculation. Indirect costs are typically either based on an institution's personnel cost or on the cost of all institutional operations. If based on personnel, which is the most common, then the base will be the total for personnel salaries or perhaps salaries and fringe benefits that you're requesting in your budget. If the indirect cost is based on institutional operational costs, then the calculation is a little more complicated. As mentioned previously, NSF does not allow indirect costs to be calculated on participant support, on equipment, or for the most part on subawards. In the case of an indirect cost rate on all college operating costs, to determine the base for the indirect cost calculation, you must subtract the budgeted amounts in the disallowed categories or line items for your direct cost total to determine the base. Once the base amount has been determined on the budget form, you enter the base amount for the calculation and the indirect cost rate. So on this particular slide, I think you can see here's where you list the items right here. So this would be where you would put your, say, your personnel costs. Say it's salaries or salaries and fringe benefits. And then you put the rate. Now the rate, you just put the number. Like if it's 20%, you put 20. You don't convert it to a decimal. And this is where you have to put the base. Now once you put those two things in there, then the system automatically calculates the indirect cost. Or if you've got all operating costs, you would list that fact here. So you would say, you know, all direct costs minus the things that you have to delete, such as your participant support costs. So once the base amount has been determined on that budget form, you enter that base amount for the calculation and the indirect cost rate, and then the budget form will calculate the indirect cost for you. As a reminder, these indirect costs are contained within the overall grant proposal requested amount. The total amount of your budget request must not exceed the limit for the category of project funding you're requesting. For a small grant for institutions new to ATE, the budget total must not exceed $200,000 for the life of the project. It can be tricky to get all of this worked out right, which is one more reason not to put your budget work off until the last minute. Now, let's recap. You must include indirect costs in your proposal. Either your institution already has an indirect cost rate or the NSF de minimis rate must be used until a federally negotiated indirect cost rate is established for your institution. The categories of costs to be used for determining the base for your indirect rate calculation are determined when the rate is negotiated. So your indirect cost rate document that you get when this is done will tell you what it is based on. If you use the NSF de minimis rate, the base will be determined by a calculation of modified direct costs. And that means that some NSF budget categories or line items are not eligible for indirect costs. Now we're getting to the bottom line. When you select the Calculate button, the system will automatically determine the total direct and indirect costs being requested. Note that budget category K, residual funds, is not applicable to NSF ATE grants, so you can just skip that section. Okay. So this is where we see the way it actually looks in the budget form, where you have your total budget. And then this is the category L, and this is the amount of your request. And it will be the same as the total direct and indirect cost for NSF ATE grants. After completing all of this work, like magic, voila, you have a budget. And it's neatly formatted in the budget system. Each year's budget will look like this, and then the cumulative budget will show all years and an overall total for the budget requests. Let's see, I jumped ahead a little bit too soon. Let me go back. There we go. As you can see, the budget form does not provide any way for you to provide details about why you are requesting these funds. You will prepare a budget justification for this purpose. This is your chance to demonstrate that your budget is right for your project. It is important that reviewers conclude that you are not asking for too little nor too much money to accomplish the work plan that you've described in your proposal. The reason you are requesting funds for various purposes should be logical. You should never ask for money in the budget that does not tie directly to an activity or something or someone that you've described in the project description. The budget and budget description should be mutually supportive. You are allowed up to 3 pages for your budget justification. It is uploaded separately within the budget section and is not counted towards any other page limits in preparing the proposal. There is no specific format required for a budget justification, and I will share some commonly used formats for this. I think I'm going to skip ahead from that for just a minute. And we'll go back to questions in a minute. For some general pointers on your budgeting, you want to think about the costs that are associated with everything that you're planning. And carefully align your activities with corresponding budget amounts that will make the work possible and reasonable. Once you've prepared it, you want to convert your budget justification into a PDF document before uploading. Even though the Fastlane system will convert documents to PDF for you, if you convert it yourself, then you have a better feel for what it's going to look like once you've uploaded it. Sometimes funny things can happen to special characters when you upload files and get them converted. So even if you have converted it yourself and uploaded it, make sure you take a look at it so that it looks right and that you have not exceeded the page limit. So you see you've got a 3-page limit for your budget justification. And there are a couple of formatting options for doing this. I'm going to cover only the narrative format. Again, you want to make sure that everything ties to your project description and that you're not asking for too much or too little. You want to devote time to your budget development. As Ellen Haas mentioned earlier regarding travel costs, you want to do your research. Don't just guesstimate and throw numbers in there. Make sure that there's some real basis for the dollars that you're asking for. And as a grant writer told me many, many years ago, NSF does not fund, etc. So be careful that you outline what you want to spend money on and not just and so forth and so on or etc. or something like that. That usually doesn't fly. And you want this budget to make sense to the reviewer. So ask yourself the questions that you would ask if it was your money that someone were asking for. You know, how much do they want? How did you calculate it? Who's it for? What are the items? You know, what are you going to do with it? And for how many people? We talked about making sure that you put the number of participants when you're asking for participant support dollars, and explain your cumulative amounts. Now, here's an example of a narrative budget justification. I've got 3 pages here just to show you a few things about the kinds of details that people will be, reviewers and program officers will be looking for. In this case, you've got a college that's in the small grants category, requesting $199,896. In the senior personnel, they tell about who's going to be working and what they're going to be doing for the money that you're asking for. You've got other personnel, and you're explaining specifics about what those people are going to be doing and how much money you're asking each year for that. And then we've got the fringe benefits that are associated with the salaries that are being requested. Notice too, as we go through this example, these alphabet letters, D, E, and F, those are aligned with the NSF budget form, and that's the format that we're recommending that you use. It just makes it really easy to keep those alphabet letters the same as they are on the budget form. And in a case like equipment, in this case, this particular project is not requesting equipment. The alphabet letters are there anyway with none written beside it, so that it just keeps all your alphabet letters straight and is really clear. For your travel, as was pointed out earlier by Ellen, we've got very specific information: how much for airfare, how much for baggage fees, how much for ground transportation, per diem, registrations, whatever is your costs are going to be are all outlined very specifically. In the participant support category, you've got your stipends here. You're talking about how many people are going to be there, and how much per person, and how many participants, and how that calculation was done. And the same thing for travel. And then we'll look at the final page of this particular justification. You've got your other direct costs, your materials and supplies, all of the details outlined. And down here for your consultant services, as was pointed out earlier. In this case, you've got an external evaluator. It talks about how many site visits they're going to make a year, how much their travel is going to be, how much you're going to pay them, at what rate, for how many days. That's the kind of detail they're looking for. So this budget justification format is one that would work pretty well. And you just need to make sure you keep it down to 3 pages, but give them a lot of detail and make sure it aligns to what you've described in your proposal. Now we're going to go back to Dr. Carter to talk about some common budget justification mistakes and take some more questions.
Okay, so I think everybody can see very quickly. Here's a few tips. You don't want it to be too short or too long. One of the things that we didn't discuss is if you are going to use a subaward can have its own budget justification. So you can have 3 pages for your budget justification. And if you have a subawardee to another community college or a 4-year institution, and they can also have their own budget justification. You will absolutely be asked, if you have consultants, why you haven't specified the amount of time they'll be spending on the project and what their daily rate is. Again, time for personnel. Let's say you just ask for someone to have 100% release time for their entire academic year, and you haven't really justified that. That's one of the things that will come back to haunt you. You will have to fix that. You cannot ask for overload pay, and I know this at times can be a real problem for full-time faculty who make their full salary each year by teaching overload courses every single semester. But it's something that NSF just does not allow. That's one of those ones you have to think about carefully as you prepare your budget. Don't just stick in dollars because you think that you could figure out how to use extra dollars. I always think it's very interesting when the budget maximum for small new to AT, it's $200,000, And amazingly enough, the absolute number shows up as $200,000 on that cover page, not $197,900. It comes out exact. And believe me, we will carefully look. The program officers really spend a lot of time looking at the budgets. Another thing to avoid is a lot of to be hired on your budget. If you are going to have to hire someone, in supplementary documents, provide the reviewers and program officers with a job announcement. What kind of qualifications would you look for in this person? Perhaps you have somebody that you already know you think you would hire. Should this proposal go forward to an award, you could actually name that person and state that. This is an example of a person with the correct qualifications that could potentially be working on this project should it go forward to funding. And then part-time faculty, again, they're not participants. Usually they are not consultants. They are employees of your institution. So you include them appropriately using the pay rate that they are paid by your institution. I think that's most of it. I mean, it really doesn't work to try and pad your budget. You're going to get called on it, but you want to be accurate. One other point to make would be, and people haven't been doing this as much as they used to, if you are requesting equipment, go ahead and put down whether or not you've asked for an educational discount from a company. It used to be that people would say, we've checked out 3 different sources for this piece of equipment. Maybe it's an atomic force microscope or something. This is the company that has provided us the best educational discount, and this is what we plan to go forward with. Doesn't mean that your quote might have expired by the time you actually hear you have the award, but it shows the reviewers that you are thinking carefully about your budget. And I thought it was interesting when Elaine said, think about these questions as though you're asking them of using your own money. You are using your own money. This is our federal taxpayer dollars that are going to support all of these projects. So in a sense, we're all paying into these. So you really do want to think about that and think about it as you craft your budget and your budget justification. And I think I'll stop there and see if we've got time for other questions.
Dr. Carter, we actually are running short on time, so I will ask one of the most popular questions, and it's, what happens if my college's indirect changes after I submit my proposal, either up or down?
That's fine. That's really not a problem, other than it might be a problem for you as a potential awardee. Pretty much the National Science Foundation, hopefully as you all know, functions by merit review. So if your proposal goes forward and reviews well, you're going to be contacted by a program officer with a series of questions, usually some concerns and things that have arisen either during the panel review process itself or from the program officer's standpoint. We, as program officers, are told not to begin negotiations unless we are planning to make a recommendation to award. So if you get that email, that's the point in time where you're going to have a lot of work to do. You're going to want to answer as quickly as you can, but as accurately as you can. And if your indirect rate has changed, you can tell the program officer that and say, because of this, we really need to submit a revised budget to you. And there's no problem with that at all.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Carter. Elaine?
At this time, I think we want to start our entertain some more questions.
Great. I will go ahead and answer the next most popular question, and it asks, if a course release is not possible for PI and co-PIs, is there another way to include weekly grant hours in the academic year budget?
You can't ask for more than you can't do overload. Other than it does say within the ATE proposal itself, it does give a section called extra compensation above base salary. It says only for special situations. For example, if you have to do evening or weekend workshops or classes. So that's something that you can think about. That is possible. It is specified in the solicitation. I'm just going to tell you the page it's on, and of course, my printer cut off the page numbers, but this was under Section B, budgetary information. It does say that if you are asking for this extra compensation, it has to be computed at a rate that's not in excess of the monthly rate of your base academic yearly salary. And you want to, again, have that in the budget justification, and you have to let your program officer, know, and it has to be approved by the NSF program officer. So it's in the budget justification. We will see that, and then we would actually say that we would approve it or not.
Thank you. I also have, is it correct that if an institution has an indirect cost rate with another federal institution, for example, NIH, it must be used, it must use the same rate with NSF?
But however you negotiate, however your institution has negotiated that federal rate, it covers whatever agency you're coming into. So Elaine mentioned that if you have none at this current point in time, a lot of times you would be directed to Health and Human Services to your institution would develop and negotiate that indirect rate. So if you have an existing one, yes, you actually do have to use it. I would point out that check carefully. Depends on where you are going to hold most of the work you're doing on your project. Let's say that an awful lot of the work you're doing is off-site and it's not on campus. Some institutions have an off-campus indirect rate, and as well as an on-campus indirect rate. So be sure you get all the specifics from the people in your financial office.
Thank you, Dr. Carter.
Thank you, Dr. Carter.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, I'm going to go ahead and take us into our final portion of this webinar. At this time, I'd like to thank Dr. Carter for her generosity and amazing answers to our questions today. I also like to say how much we value your time and presence on this webinar. Please stay, if you can, after this we do have a brief survey, but please connect with Mentor Connect. We have a number of ways by which you can stay in contact with us. Send us an email, visit us on Facebook, follow up on Twitter, and check us out on our YouTube channel where this presentation will be available. We welcome any questions or follow-up that you may have. We did run a little short on time today, so please email us with your questions. Most importantly, we encourage you to visit us at www.mentorconnect.org on our website. Mentor Connect has been refunded by the National Science Foundation, so please watch for some incredibly exciting news about future opportunities. Applications for the Cohort 4 Mentor Connect cohort will be available in summer 2015. We will also be holding a free orientation webinar for those applicants if you want to know more about the Mentor Connect project and what we do. Call or email us, as we do have a just-in-time and on-demand help desk for answers to any of your questions and inquiries. Should you have colleagues who have missed this production, slides and the full presentation will be available. On behalf of our project team, we would like to thank you for your participation and attention for this webinar. We hope that you will connect with us, and we're looking forward to serving you. We would also like to take a quick moment to thank Maytech Networks for hosting today. They're always such a pleasure to work with, and it's greatly appreciated. We have reached the conclusion of our webinar for today. However, we would like to pose a short survey which will help us with process improvement for Mentor Connect. Roxanne, I'll pass it to you. if you'd like to give instructions.
Yes, ma'am.
For
Thank
this
you, Elaine.
survey.
For our attendees, please help us build a better webinar. You have just a few short questions there, and if you can take a moment to answer, we'd really appreciate it. On behalf of the Maytech team, thank you for joining us.